So I'll sit here today and I guarantee you that Juan Soto, given the fact that he's moving to left field, given the fact that Luis Robert is going to be playing center field next to him, I'm guaranteeing you that he is going to have at least a zero defensive run save season. Come back to this moment. We're going to go from, what is it, -12 to 0.
I mean, we'll take 0 at this point. I wish Stearns just came out and said, hey, we looked at the numbers, we looked at the data, we looked at our ballpark. Juan Soto needs to play left field because it's better for him and it's better for an organization. I think he's lying, and whatever it is, you want to cover it up for whatever the reasons were that we just previously mentioned. Go ahead and do that, but we're not idiots. We all know what's going on here, right? We all can like read the tea leaves happening over here. But I just wish that he came out and said, hey, this makes our ball club a better ball club. He should be a left fielder, not a right fielder. It's a tough dimension in Citi Field. We're trying to set him up to be the best player possible, and this puts him in that position.
Yeah, I think Stearns will make a terrible politician for the fact that when he starts to speak like that, you can definitely see a smirk on his face. He doesn't believe what he's saying. He's doing his job. But at the same time, he's just smirking away and talking, pretty much out of the side of his mouth. But it is hilarious to see that smirk. Because when it comes, you just know right away.
Voices rising up from the stands.
Welcome back to Meet the Mets fans. I'm your host, Stefan. I'm here with Justin and Sid. What's up, guys? How's it going?
Good. Can't complain. Getting ready. Spring training
Doing
right
well.
around the corner. Let's go.
Doing well, man. It's been a while for us. I'm happy to get back on the pod with the boys. It's been, I think we took a week off over here. Stefan, your background looks a little bit different. Very similar to what's going on with Sid's life right now. I think that had played a factor in it.
Yeah, man, we are not in the Meet the Mets fan studios, as you can see. I'm here in sunny Florida. It's amazing, the weather over here right now. It's been like 80 degrees in the afternoon every day since we got here. It's awesome.
Well, that's nice,
Yeah.
Stefan. I'm over here. We reached a high of 37 degrees yesterday. That was kind of cool. So a lot of that snow and ice was melting a little bit. I'm jealous of both of you guys, but you know what? Looking at a lot of the social media and the Mets, right, down in spring training, them in Florida, I'm all jacked up anyway, so we're in a good place.
Yeah, we're here down in Florida. Maybe I'll swing by Port St. Lucie and check that out, see some of these guys live in action. But yeah, spring training is well underway. We got to get another podcast out there. Let's talk about some of the things that have been happening around this team. About a week ago, a little over that, David Stearns met the media at spring training and dropped some pretty heavy bombs on Met fans about things happening around the team. Let's start off with Lindor. What do we got with Francisco Lindor, guys?
Yeah, hamate bone surgery underway for Lindor. 6 weeks recovery timeline. Hamate bone has a lot of lingering issues with power. I really think that he should just take his time. There's no rush. Early in the season, let's get everything right because we don't want the hamate bone injury to kind of affect anything else. Let him if it takes 6 weeks recovery time, take a solid 12. Take an additional 6 weeks. Let's get this guy right. Let's get that wrist strong. I don't want him to consider giving up switch hitting, but maybe it's something he consider, but I think it's going to be crucial for him to get this recovery right because, we're thinking, a long run this season. We don't want anything nagging. And if the power kind of dips, we kind of just have to wait it out and let things kind of take run its course. But yeah, better now than later.
Yeah. And so you mentioned the 6-week timetable, right? When he had the surgery, pretty much that gives him like a day before opening day is like exactly 6 weeks, in terms of like fully recovered. That's also with like rehab games like built into it as well. I am with you on that. It's not something that I know we're all jacked up for opening day and it's an expensive day and people are all about it. But, if he misses the first like weekend series because he's down there in extended spring and trying to get more at bats, I think that might be in the best interest of the Mets. Their goal is not to win opening day. Their goal is to win a World Series. And so, if that is the case and Lindor isn't necessarily ready for that opening day, I think it's definitely something that you can put him on, an IL stint in sometime in, the end of March. It doesn't have to be an IL start to start the beginning of the season. You can do it a pre-backed date in the end of March. And so even if he just misses 2 or 3 days or whatever the case may be, it doesn't have to be on a full extended IL stint for this injury.
Yeah, so the hamate bone is the same exact surgery that Francisco Alvarez needed to have last season. We saw when Alvi came back that there was a legitimate power dip, but he was able to battle through that power dip, and we saw the power come back towards the end of the season without him needing to take time off and kind of let that thing rest. So it really does seem like within a couple of days, they expect Lindor back in camp doing workouts. I don't know about necessarily hitting, but definitely doing workouts and getting himself ready. I do think that he'll be close to ready to go. I don't know if it's going to take 12 weeks, Sid, but I hear what you're saying about don't rush this guy. And ultimately, I agree with that. I don't know if we need to wait 12 weeks. That's 3 months of the season, or 3 months from the time that he had the surgery. But let's get him back out there nice and healthy. Let's make sure that the power we expect him to have is there. But I do think it's going to change his game a little bit. And we saw that happen with Lindor last year with the pinky toe injury. Right? Like the toe injury that he had changed his game just a little bit. He definitely was compensating for that. We don't want to see him compensating. We need him back at full strength. And so the likelihood is that, I mean, if we're all looking at it, he's probably going to miss a little bit of time, whether that's 2 games, whether that's 2 weeks. He's probably going to miss some time. David Stearns was asked directly, what's going to happen? Who's going to play shortstop while he's injured? And he listed out some potential solutions to what would happen if Lindor does need to take some time away from the team.
Yeah. So he mentioned a couple internal candidates, but one of the big questions I was asked was, is Bo Bichette going to be someone that you would consider to play shortstop? Obviously, Bo Bichette has played shortstop his entire career. When he signed with the Mets, they signed him to play third base. At the time, Stearns said that is not something that they are considering. I think that Bo Bichette playing shortstop would have to be a really long-term injury for Lindor. Like, God forbid it's not going to be this hamate injury. It's going to be some type of, if he does have an additional injury, that would cause for Bo Bichette to be transitioning or moving back to shortstop. I think their goal right now is to get him ready at third base in spring training. I don't think they should be flip-flopping him, moving him to short, moving him back to third for, like you just mentioned before, from potentially just for a couple of games. If there is an extended injury for Lindor, that is definitely something I'm sure that the Mets would then consider, but they are not considering him to be a fill-in shortstop for just 2 or 3 games at the beginning of the season when he's trying to learn this new position down in spring training.
Yeah, agreed. I think his full concentration needs to be at third base. Bo Bichette needs to just get as many reps as he can. Not saying that he can't play a good shortstop for the Mets, but I think that would undermine the whole transition. I personally think Simeon, would be a good option. Gold Glove, second baseman. I think he could hold it down pretty well, and I think we move Beatty to second, which I know, was in his role of a super utility guy. So I think that kind of fits, what they plan and, the kind of role he'll be playing. I think that's probably my preference, but I'll hear what you guys have to say.
Yeah, I'm gonna say it. Bo Bichette can't play shortstop for the Mets. That can't happen. The Mets have 4 infielders on our starting roster that are shortstops. He is number 4 on the list of guys that should be playing shortstop for the New York Mets. He's not a great defender. Marcus Semien is way better than he is. At this point, I'd rather see Brett Beatty play it. Not saying that that's going to happen, but there are other guys that are on this roster that are much better defenders that you need at that position, and you need to let Bo Bichette concentrate on being a third baseman. So I agree with that completely. He's not the guy. I'm shocked that the ask wasn't, is Marcus Semien going to be playing there? Is Jorge Polanco going to be playing there? Why would Bo Bichette be the shortstop that you expect to be playing there? I have no idea. But Bo Bichette, focus on third base. Let's work on those hands. Let's work on the reaction time. We'll take a look at what his initial work in a little bit. But yeah, the internal candidates. I know Vidal Brujan is one of those guys that they are looking at as potentially stepping in for Lindor in the short term. We've obviously got Ronnie Mauricio, who's played some shortstop, and obviously can hold down that position for a little bit of time. Are we missing Luis Angel Acuna in this moment?
I'd rather have Mauricio over Acuna for sure. I think as long as Mauricio is healthy, he's a dark horse candidate to take shortstop and run with it for until Lindor comes back. You try to see how who wins out of spring training. But go ahead, Justin.
Yeah, I think the problem with the Mauricio one, again, that this is a short-term injury, right? So if you're talking about 2 games, you're talking about 3 games, or you're even talking about a week, David Stearns is obsessed with options. And the fact that Mauricio wasn't brought down to the minors last year because of that one option that he has available, I cannot imagine Stearns and the Mets making a decision to now use that one option for Mauricio at the beginning of the year for just a potential couple of games. Now, once again, if we're talking about a long-term injury for Lindor, then that is something maybe that they consider. They definitely are going to be putting him in the minor leagues, and and Mendoza talked about how they want Mauricio back at shortstop in terms of gameplay. That's been his natural position. You guys just mentioned that before, but I don't think Mauricio is going to come out of camp as the starting shortstop unless you're going to be playing him every single day. Mendoza talked about how the fact that last year, this guy has been injured for the previous 2 seasons, and he just wasn't getting enough at-bats. What Mauricio needs is to go down to AAA, get at-bats, play every single day, and show what I think a lot of us think is a ton of talent, and for him to become an actual legitimate starting player for the Mets in the future.
With you guys. But all right, let's move on to the next thing here, talking about defensive positioning. Juan Soto is going to be playing left field for the New York Mets. No more right field. No more looking at him over there in right field. Juan Soto making the move to left field. David Stern says this happened naturally. Natural conversation between him and the manager, him and Mendoza having conversations on the phone. Juan Soto is obviously playing left field for Team Dominican Republic in the WBC, and will now be permanently playing left field for the New York Mets. Thoughts?
I think Juan Soto had a lot of confidence that the Mets were going to sign Kyle Tucker. So like I think he kind of made up his mind and was like, okay, I'll move over for Kyle Tucker. It didn't happen, but I think that works well. Soto played a lot all over both corner positions throughout his career. I think he'll be fine. I think the arm will probably be a little better. Yeah, I'm not worried about this. I think he'll give incrementally better defensive production, which is not saying much.
Yeah, I mean, Soto was ranked. He was a -12 defensive runs scored last year. He was horrible in right field. He's a bad defender. I was so angry listening to David Stern's attempt to become a politician while talking about this move to left field. I think there's a couple of reasons why he was not trying to say that this was a Mets decision, that it came from the Mets, that he's a horrible right fielder, that he needs to play left field. There's obviously a couple of reasons for that. Number one, you don't throw your best player, face of this franchise in the future, down the bus saying that you can't play right field, we need you to play left field, right? I think that's one of the reasons why. I think another reason why is because of Nimmo, right? The reason why Juan Soto was playing right field last year was because Brandon Nimmo was the left fielder, and he can't play right field because he's got a terrible arm. He's not someone that can go into there and actually make a strong throw, which is what you need for a right fielder. And so I think that Stearns trying to become a politician sounded terrible during his press conference on why they were moving Soto to left field. The reason you move Soto to left field is because the dimensions of right field at Citi Field are difficult to play in. He had a tough stretch last year down the road, and it's not something of his strong suit. So let's put him in left field, which is just an easier dimensional ballpark for the Mets, and allow him to become what is let's call it an average defender versus a very below average defender. Juan Soto came up in the major leagues with the Nationals as a left fielder. Prior to the 2024 season with the Yankees, Juan Soto played more left field than he had played right field. I don't know why he automatically was put in as the Mets right fielder, besides the fact that Nimmo just couldn't play right field and a roster construction.
I mean, that's why, right? It's because Nimmo was there. And this is the obvious move for Juan Soto. Left field at Citi Field specifically is the spot where you will put your weaker defender. Juan Soto clearly is that. His arm he's got a cannon, right? So I think that it will play really nicely over in left field. The addition of Luis Robert is making that move of Juan Soto to left field that much more manageable as well. Luis Robert is going to cover a ton of ground in center field and automatically make Juan Soto a better defensive player than he was. So I'll sit here today and I guarantee you that Juan Soto, given the fact that he's moving to left field, given the fact that Luis Robert is going to be playing center field next to him, I'm guaranteeing you that he is going to have at least a 0 defensive run save season. Come back to this moment. We're going to go from, -12 to 0.
I mean, we'll take 0 at this point. Are we going with Luis Robert or Luis Robert? Which one are we doing here? You actually just said both of them, right, when you were talking about him. I know Sid goes Robert. I go Robert. You just decided to go both of them. Are you trying to please both of us in that conversation there?
100%. I'm just going to say, I'm going to say whatever feels natural in the moment. Sometimes Robert is just going to flow right off the tongue.
The Robert sounds awesome, honestly. I actually hope his name really is Luis Robert. I don't know. But yeah, no, I'm with you on this. This just made total sense. I wish Stearns just came out and said, hey, we looked at the numbers, we looked at the data, we looked at our ballpark. Juan Soto needs to play left field because it's better for him and it's better for an organization. Last year, they should have changed it in the middle of the season. Like, it shouldn't have just been Juan Soto, you're playing right field, Nimmo, you're playing left. I know Nimmo's arm isn't great in right field, but Soto was struggling defensively. Like, why in that moment couldn't the Mets say, hey, we would like you to go play left field? It's not a foreign position for him. It's not something that he needs to learn. As I just previously mentioned, Juan Soto played more left field than he's played right field in his career prior to going to the Yankees. He came up as a left fielder. And so I don't understand why it took for a conversation allegedly between Mendoza and Soto when they were talking about the WBC for them to make a decision that Juan Soto should be the left fielder. It just doesn't make any sense. I think he's lying, and whatever it is, you want to cover it up for whatever the reasons were that we just previously mentioned. Go ahead and do that. But we're not idiots. We all know what's going on here, right? We all can like read the tea leaves happening over here. But I just wish that he came out and said, hey, this makes our ball club a better ball club. He should be a left fielder, not a right fielder. It's a tough dimension in Citi Field. We're trying to set him up to be the best player possible, and this puts him in that position.
Yeah, I think Stearns will make a terrible politician for the fact that when he starts to speak like that, you can definitely see a smirk on his face where he doesn't believe what he's saying. And it's kind of, it's nice to see, but you kind of know he's doing his job. But at the same time, he's just smirking away and talking, pretty much out of the side of his mouth. But
No
it's
doubt.
a clear indication that he understands the intelligence of Mets fans, and he's not trying to overly kind of overplay this. He's just going through it, move on, and let's get it moving. But it is hilarious to see that smirk because when it comes, you just know right away.
I'm with you. I'm with you on that. It was funny to see him. He's like grinning. He's like, yeah, no, it's better to do this, right? For our listening audience, right? I'm obviously gritting my teeth over here. But if we're looking at like who's going to be playing right field now, okay? You obviously have Taylor. Tyrone Taylor can play all three defensive positions. That's no problem whatsoever. Brett Baty was learning a position. Now, I know he had a little bit of experience down the minor leagues in left field, and he looked okay there. But he had to learn the position no matter what. And so I don't think it really mattered. You're going to learn left or you're going to learn right. And so if Brett Baty is your starting outfielder in some capacity, he need to learn one of the positions. Let him now learn right field. But I think if you're looking at Carson Bench throughout his college career was a right fielder. He was not a left fielder. He was not even a center fielder. He played right field mostly for his college career. He also he's got a good arm. He was a two-way player coming out of college. And so I don't think that is a concern whatsoever. And so if you're looking at like the roster construction, this really does make total sense of sticking Soto in left field and now allowing either Baty to learn this right field position. If they're not ready, you have Taylor now that obviously can play right field. And if Carson Bench is going to be your starting outfielder, that is a familiar position for him.
Yeah.
It's another commitment to Carson Bench being given a real shot here to earn the right field job. That's it.
Yeah. Also, I think it's a little insurance policy on Luis Robert getting injured or, him just falling off. You could then just take Bench, slot him over to center field or put in Tyrone Taylor. And then you kind of still have those two in Baty and Soto just kind of anchor down the two corners and see. But I think they're just giving more options for Bench to kind of come in and play, ability for playing time and also kind of just cover their bases on any potential injuries with Luis Robert, who's been super injury prone. So, I think it's smart management.
Oh, you going Robert and Robert too. All right, Sid. I see what you got going on here. I
How
heard
about we
that.
just-
I heard that.
How
I
about
gotta get a Luis Robert going on too. I gotta get one in
What do you want?
this podcast.
You want to go with the nickname? What's the nickname? Lubab. I don't know, man. I don't know.
All right, next up, we got Steve Cohen. And so Steve Cohen sat down with Howie Rose, who's obviously our broadcaster, right, for the Mets on the radio. And so Steve Cohen sat down with Howie Rose, and they met for about 24 minutes. We're not going to go through the entirety of that interview, but we definitely want to highlight some of the major points that Howie Rose mentioned and Steve was talking about based on the offseason stuff.
Yes. So first up, we'll talk about Pete Alonso, right? So Steve Cohen brought up Pete Alonso and whether or not the Mets he was going to step in and take over the negotiations with Pete Alonso like he did last year and make sure that a deal landed. And Steve Cohen pretty much admitted that, yes, last year I stepped in and I got the deal done. This year I could have stepped in and gotten the deal done, but we were never going to go to 5 years. And Pete Alonso got a great offer from Baltimore for 5 years. He decided to take that. No harm, no foul here. We were just never going to go to that number of years for Pete Alonso. And almost putting it out there very publicly that he didn't believe, just like David Stearns didn't believe, that Pete Alonso is a player that's going to hold up over the course of the next 5 years, and ultimately said, good luck, Pete. We'll see you later. Enjoy Baltimore.
Yeah, it's pretty clear that the Mets were shocked that Pete Alonso got a 5-year deal. Like, I think that if you asked any of those in the moment, I think when Scott Boras went to them and said, hey, we have a 5-year deal, if he even did that, I think that at that moment, they were shocked that that happened, and there was no way that they were ever going to consider giving Pete Alonso a long-term contract. You know, I don't know why Pete has this stigma that he's going to break down. He is consistent, one of the most consistent players in all of baseball. He plays every single day. He doesn't miss games. He is highly productive while he is playing. But for whatever the reasons are, some screen is telling them that Pete Alonso is not going to, over the next 5 years, produce on the same level that he is producing at, and they just were never going to consider it. So it's just really interesting to hear again how it was that 5-year deal that there was just no chance for it.
Yeah, I agree. Good luck, Pete. I hope, the small confines of Baltimore gives you a lot more home runs. We're always going to root for Pete. That's
Yeah.
it. We're just moving on,
Yeah, I know. I also don't want the audience to be listening right now and be like, oh, Steve Cohen hates Pete Alonso. That's not what happened, right? Like, he does talk about the contract negotiations. He also talks about how he understands how it was a difficult offseason for a lot of Met fans, and how at the beginning, especially in December, there was a lot of fans that were upset. He also talks about how he's like, when I took over this team, he's like, these are the players that were on this roster when I first took over ownership. He's like, I have a relationship with all of these players, right? Whether it was Nimmo, McNeil, and Alonso. And so I don't want the audience to think like, oh man, Steve Cohen's bashing Pete Alonso. He wasn't whatsoever. He just was being honest and saying how the Mets just were not willing to go to a 5-year deal. All right. So all right, next up. Yeah, next thing up, he talks about Diaz. I think a lot of Met fans are like sitting here saying like, if David Stearns can go back in the offseason, what is one thing that he would do differently? And I think a lot of us would say that he probably would have handled that Edwin Díaz negotiations a little bit differently. And Steve Cohen talks about it. And he mentions that he actually states that this one was perplexing, he says. He believed that the Mets had a really competitive offer. He believed that he actually thinks that they actually had a better offer than the Dodgers. And he talks about something called a conditional year. I'm not sure if he's talking about like a vesting option, in terms of like they were giving him a vesting option for a 4th year, whether it was like saves, whether it was appearances, whether it was innings, something to that effect. But that 3-year deal was actually really at least an option for a 4th year for Diaz. And I think it was perplexing for Cohen and the Mets, because I don't think Diaz ever came back to them and said, hey, here's the offer that I have from the Dodgers. What is your best offer? And I think that's what was the frustrating part for the Mets and for the Diaz situation.
Yeah, I think the situation started to sour when they didn't extend him, last year, or when he wanted that full extension. And I think he was determined to go to free agency. And I think that he just wanted to change the scenery. I feel like, you could cloak it however you want to cloak it. Everyone's trying to save face. The Mets trying to save face that, they didn't botch this. Diaz just trying to placate the Mets fans because he did have such good success here, and he knows he has a lot of fans rooting for him. Still, I just think it's run its course, just like Pete. Maybe Diaz wants to be in LA, but we'll see. See how it works out. He's been an up and down closer, throughout his career, and who knows? Maybe this is one that we look back to and say it worked out well. And, even if it doesn't work out well, and Diaz goes on to become top closer for the next 3 years, I still don't think Mets fans are going to lose too much sleep over it.
Yeah, I find the Diaz situation really interesting, because we entered into this offseason saying the one thing we can't do here is lose Edwin Díaz, but he's the one guy that's left that I haven't really thought all that much about, for whatever the case may be. And that's not me saying that Edwin Díaz wasn't a great Met or Edwin Díaz wasn't a great closer. He absolutely was. I'm not even sitting here saying that Devin Williams is going to be better than him. If for whatever reason the emotional attachment to Edwin Díaz is just different than the emotional attachment to a guy like Pete Alonso. So yeah, I'm not going to miss him all that much, I don't think. In fact, I'll go out on a limb here and say Edwin Díaz equal Tanner Scott. Let's go for it.
Oh God. So Diaz was actually asked about the comments that Stearns made. It's out in LA. And obviously they were trying to bait him, right? Just to like, talk about it. He took the high road over there and he talked about how he was in the market and how he's got the right to free agency to talk to other clubs. And he's like, I love the Mets organization. I love the ownership. I love the players there. I love everything of that. He's like, I made a determination that I thought was just best for me and for winning. And, I think that kind of like closes the loop on the Diaz situation. It's going to be really interesting to see when he comes back to Citi Field, whether or not he's going to hear some boos. But I think he'll get a standing ovation. And it's deserved. For sure.
Should I take the bobblehead when I give him the standing ovation? All right, next up, Steve Cohen talked about Kyle Tucker and the negotiations with Kyle Tucker, whether or not he actually thought they were going to have a chance to sign him. And he did. He thought that the Mets made a really good offer for Tucker, had a really good chance of signing him. But ultimately, he believes that the signing of Bo Bichette, which clearly we all know was the Mets' pivot, it's not something they were going to go do if they got Kyle Tucker. He believes that Bo Bichette is actually the better fit for this team.
Yeah. I think that's fine. It's a pivot. I think Tucker again. I don't know if the fit would have been good here, as well as Bo Bichette's right-handed bat is something that we essentially needed in this lineup. A little protection for Soto after losing Pete. I think that was crucial. I think it was a good pivot, but at the same time, I just think Stearns moves in silence, and the acquisition of Simeon kind of logged in. Maybe Bo Bichette was always the plan, and it wasn't a pivot. Maybe they wanted to get Tucker and Bo Bichette, which has been rumored or kind of talked about, so maybe it's not like, okay, you lost out on Tucker and then you ran to Bichette, but maybe Bichette was always in line. And I think that's just a compliment to Stearns, keeping a quiet front office, no leaks, to kind of give himself the best ability to negotiate these deals. It is what it is. I'm very excited about this roster. I think, having the ability to see what you have in a lot of these young prospects is worth more than tying yourself down to like another big, massive contract. So when it's all said and done, I think this work is going to work out well, and it did work out.
Yeah, Cohen talks about that. He mentions how he gives a lot of praise to Stearns and the front office, and how this wasn't like after Tucker made that decision, they weren't scrambling. They were talking to both throughout the offseason. It was something that they were absolutely heavily involved in. They were waiting for the Tucker decision before they then made in some case, like people calling it a pivot, but they were waiting for the Tucker decision. I think a lot of the free agent players were waiting for the Tucker decision. And kind of when that happened, it was then a snowball effect that really took place after that. And so, Stearns is not just sitting there, right? Front office is not just sitting there saying, we're not sure what to do over here. They are clearly like going through a bunch of scenarios, outlining everything that's going to take place. If this happens, this happens. And so, I think that Bo Bichette is a good fit in terms of their lineup. They clearly needed a right-handed stick after losing Alonso, as just mentioned before. The only hope right now is that he's going to be able to successfully transition into playing third base at least a decent level. I don't think anyone's worried about offensively, right? I know that there's a clip of him taking Freddie Peralta deep in his first spring training at bat. But his third base defense, we'll see. It could be an adventure over there.
Let's jump to the next one here. Back a little bit to the David Stearns comments that he made. We actually learned from David in his initial presser that A.J. Minter is going to be out until May. That is something that had been potentially in the works of Minter not being ready. It seemed all offseason that it would be, if he's not ready right away, he'll be ready soon after. It'll be a couple of days, couple of weeks maybe. But till May is pretty much a whole month of the season that the Mets will not have A.J. Minter, and that definitely is going to take a little bit of a toll on the bullpen at the beginning of the season. What do you guys think this bullpen is going to look like moving forward?
It's going to be a lot of mix and matching, a lot of Luke Weaver coming in for 2 innings. Guys don't have to pick up the slack. Minter's a tremendous player, and I think having an addition like that around May, June is going to actually really help give a break to a lot of the guys that may have been overworked in April. So I think it's going to work out well. I think a lot of the younger guys, a lot of guys that are on the fringe. Maybe we see some more Craig Kimbrell. Maybe we see Luis Garcia. So some of the new guys, the non-roster invitees, kind of play themselves into spring training, get a roster spot, and really hold it down for Minter while he's out.
Yeah, I think with the Minter injury, I think what the Mets now need to figure out is you're now going into the season with potentially one lefty in Brooks Rowley, right? And so I think right now they need to figure out whether or not they're going to have on their roster a second lefty and if that is necessary for them in the bullpen. And so, what do those options look like in terms of like who might be that lefty, I think is what spring training is going to kind of figure out. I know recently the Mets had acquired this guy, Brian Hudson. He's apparently a 6'8" left-handed pitcher. He's another Milwaukee guy that I guess Stearns like scouted earlier on in 2024. He posted a 1.73 ERA with Milwaukee. He obviously got blown up last year, right, with a 4.80 ERA, but that's relievers for you, right? Like one season they're good, 1 month they're okay, the next season they're bad, the next season they're good. And so I think that this is a flyer. If Brian Hudson is someone that performs well in spring training, I can see him making the roster at the beginning of the year while Minter is out. You also have guys like Brandon Waddell, who we saw last year, could potentially also be a lefty that also can go multiple innings for you. So I think with the Minter injuries, whether or not, I think the big decision is going to be is whether or not the Mets want to carry just one lefty in the bullpen or they want to stretch out someone else and use a second lefty down there.
Yeah, I don't know how much I mean, obviously having the mixing and matching in your bullpen take place matters to teams. I don't know that it matters as much with the new rules that are in place where you can't have a left-handed one-out guy, right? A loogie, as they used to call them, a guy that would come in and get an out against a lefty is not going to happen because pitchers have to face 3 batters unless it's the end of an inning. And so
Right.
the need to have a second lefty, I don't know if it's there. Brooks really dominated for the Mets last year. Hopefully AJ Minter can kind of do a similar thing coming in later on into the season. I agree with you, Sid. I think having a guy who's not pitched pretty much in 2 years, not being expected to be relied on for a full season is a good move here, right? Even if he's ready to go early, holding him back a little bit to make sure that he's ready to go at the end of the season, I think is going to be way more important than making sure he's ready to go in April. The other guy that could go into the Mets bullpen, but also could be a starter for the New York Mets is our guy, Tobias Myers, right? We've talked about Tobias Myers a lot on the podcast. Stearns pretty much said they're stretching Myers out to be a starter. We'll see where the offseason, where spring training takes us. And if we need him to be a starter, we need him ready to step into that role. If we don't need him in that role, he's definitely going to be in the bullpen. So Myers is a guy with options. We kind of talked a little bit about whether or not we think he'll be going down to the minor leagues to be stretched out as a starter. The Mets are essentially doing that in spring training and saying he's going to be a part of our 26-man roster. He's a lock. So that's either going to be as a starter or in the bullpen. Tobias Myers is definitely going to be on the major league roster.
Yeah, as he should be, right? Tobias Myers should absolutely be on this roster, whether it's a starting pitcher or it's a reliever. Is I think going to be one of the arms that we're going to be relying on a lot this season. I think he gives a lot of flexibility to this club. He's proven that he's a capable starter, but he's also very capable in the bullpen as well, which for a lot of players, that's not an easy transition to do. They're stretching him out, obviously in spring training, barring injuries, right? Because we've seen pretty much for the last 5 years that some starting pitcher, if not multiple starting pitchers, get hurt in spring training. And so I think that this is another great hedge that the Mets can utilize. Tobias Myers is going to play a huge role for us in the 2026 season. And that kind of jumps us into like David Stearns talking about the 6-man rotation. Last offseason, I felt like that's all he discussed, whether or not that 6-man rotation is going to take place. This year, he's kind of he's not really committing to that 6-man rotation. He essentially was asked about that question, and he kind of stated, yeah, we'll see. We'll see what the end of spring training looks like. And if all guys are healthy, that's a really good problem to have. And at that point, we'll then make a decision. And so what are our thoughts about the 6-man rotation? And they're clearly not prioritizing now, Kodai Senga said.
Yeah, I think optionality is a big thing for this. They want flexibility, and I think tying yourself down to a 6-man rotation is just not a good call. Maybe they go in, give guys a little extra time, skip guys a couple times through the rotation to make them get stretched out longer. But I think we'll move Senga around to kind of make sure he's comfortable with his required 6-day kind of rotation game plan, but I don't think that will affect the other guys as much, because I suspect that, they're done kind of gearing this roster to Senga and his needs. I think they've just kind of moved on. They still want to see him be a Met and him be successful, but I'm not sure this relationship's going to last too long, if things don't go well.
Kodai Senga needs to understand that teams can't build their rotations around him. He's going to be a free agent in 2 years. And if he wants to market himself as a reliable starting pitcher, right now he doesn't have anything to back up that case. He needs to stop having that image of him I need a 6-man rotation, because major league teams aren't looking to adjust what they're doing in their starting rotation to fit one player. And so the time to pivot away from what Kodai Senga needs into what the New York Mets need is right now, and I think the Mets see that. 2 years ago, the Mets were willing to let Kodai Senga pitch in a 5-man rotation. Last year was when we heard all of this. He needs the 6-man. He needs it. He needs it. He needs it. But prior to that, he had been saying, I'm fine. I can pitch in a 5-man rotation. I've just never done it before. Mm-hmm. And 2 years ago, they attempted to do that with him. Last year, they pivoted, they gave the 6-man rotation thing, and I think it hurt the New York Mets. They're not going to allow that to happen. Kodai Senga needs to focus on one thing, and it's the thing that he went into spring training and actually said his one goal in spring training is to focus on not getting injured, right? And that's what he needs to focus on. And I don't think the 5-man rotation, 6-man rotation needs to be on topic of anybody's mind. Be ready to pitch when it's your turn to pitch and go out there and dominate. That's how you make sure that you get your next contract. And that's what he needs to focus on over the course of the next 2 years.
Yeah, the biggest problem with the 6-man rotation is the fact that a MLB team is only allowed to hold 13 pitchers max. And so by having now a 6-man rotation, you are now essentially taking someone out of the bullpen that could potentially help you. So if we're doing like simple math here, that means that if you're having a 6-man rotation, you only have 7 relievers. Where if you have a 5-man rotation, you now have 8 relievers. There was a bunch of chatter in the offseason. I'm forgetting his name now. He pitched for the Mets. What's that guy's name? He talked about how Mendoza is criminal, right? The way that he's handling the bullpen. Adam Ottavino essentially trashing Mendoza in the way that he handles the bullpen. Well, one of the problems that he has is that he doesn't have that extra guy. And so if you only now have 7 guys versus the 8 guys, those guys are now going to be pitching more and more. Forget about like the Mets rotation and how they couldn't go more than 4 or 5 innings. You just have lost another reliever that you could potentially be using and giving extra rest to those other guys. And so the 6-man rotation, I think, puts a lot of pressure on those guys in the bullpen. And so, Stearns talked about how like he wants guys that can pitch multiple innings. I think that's one of the reasons why, is because if they are, deploying this 6-man rotation, you've lost a reliever that you can potentially be using throughout the year.
Absolutely. Guys, we're going to take a look now at some of the defensive transition that's been underway for the New York Mets. And obviously we know that the Mets have a ton of guys at new positions. Let's take a look, quick video clip. These are all from SNY, so let's give credit where it's due. This is all from SNY's Twitter page, X page, snippets of Bo Bichette, Polanco, and Vientos working out at their potential new positions. Let's take a look.
Yeah, so looking at Bo Bichette, he makes me nervous. He does not have soft hands. I watched a couple of clips, not just this one, of him booting balls already. Mendoza was working a lot with him, actually, where he actually had a stopwatch behind him, essentially like trying to time out like how long he's taking to make a play. And so there was encouraging signs with that. Mendoza was mentioning that how, pretty much that he's in a good spot in terms of getting the ball out of his hand quick enough. But he really, he makes me definitely a little bit nervous, Bo Bichette at third base. And I think that was one of the criticisms of him definitely at shortstop, was that he is a poor defender. I don't want to let's call a spade here, is that he struggles defensively. He's an absolutely gifted, talented offensive player, but hopefully he's able to, mitigate some of those defensive errors, and it doesn't compound on each other.
Yeah, I think Jose Reyes was on SNY, and he said that, for Bo Bichette to have a good defensive year, he should play further back and, try to, build in some ability for him to kind of recover from any mistakes and then just use his arm because he does have a decent arm.
Yeah.
So, you try to placate it. And I think that's really good advice. And Reyes said, when he first moved over to third base, he played as far back as he possibly could just so he could, cover that, and then he'll just make it up with his arm. Granted, Jose Reyes had a cannon, but sound advice.
Yeah, I was going to say that exact same thing. Jose Reyes had a cannon. When you watch that clip of Bo Bichette making throws back to first base, it doesn't look free and easy, right? Like you look at guys play a position and it looks natural. It looks normal. He looks like he is trying his hardest to launch the baseball over to first base. Now, I've never really watched Bo play any position for too in depth beyond a few plays here or there. We'll see how that comes into play. It looks like he's rushing. It looks like he's trying to throw as hard as he possibly can. Bo, please take it easy. It's spring training. I know that you're learning the position, but please don't throw out your arm trying to make spring training plays over at third base. That's not what we need. In terms of the other guys, Polanco looked natural, what he's doing over at first base, taking some grounders, making some plays over at first. Mark Vientos, I'm more intrigued by what he looks like over at first base. You guys know how I feel about Mark Vientos. I love that dude. I think if he can take that position, if he can show some type of defensive skill set, he's obviously making sure that he has a spot on this roster. We're getting near the end here, right? Like the idea that Mark Vientos is going to get traded obviously looks less and less likely every single day that passes. It could still happen, but I think him showing something right now defensively over at first base, showing that he has some value beyond just a bat, I think can go a long way in making sure that he stays here. And I really do believe in Mark Vientos' bat, so I'd love to see that.
Yeah, I'm less worried about the Polanco Vientos at first base than I am with Bo. I think first base is a position that it's a lot of in-game decisions or unique decisions that you have to make, which I think is a little bit tricky for first base. Whether it's like, hey, do I go for this ball? Do I cover it, right? Like feeding the pitcher, right? So there's just like a little bit different like positioning that you have to do for first base, and it's a lot of in-game decision that you have to make, and that's just going to come with experience. And so there might be a small learning curve, but in terms of like them scooping the ball or them like being able to like play the position, I'm not worried about that. These guys are major league players. They all have really soft hands. Polanco was a shortstop coming up, right? So like, I'm not too worried in regards to that type of thing. It's really going to be like the in-game decision-making that has to happen. And I think that for first basemen, there's a lot of unique situations that aren't occurring in any other position. So I think that's really kind of what we got to look at for the spring training for these guys. All right, next up, we got Alvy. I'm going to say right now, I think Francisco Alvarez is going to have an unbelievable year. I am ready, and I think he's ready to explode onto the scene. This guy, if we remember, now this was a few years ago, but Francisco Alvarez was like the number 1 or number 2 overall prospect in all of baseball. Not just like from the Mets organization. I'm talking MLB. This guy coming up, he was ranked as the number 1 or number 2 overall prospect in all of the majors. And he is someone that I think for Met fans that it's been a disappointment. Like, let's call a spade here. It has been a disappointment. This guy last year got sent down to AAA because he just wasn't doing his job well. But I am really excited for Alvarez. I think he's going to have a breakout year, and I think he's taking this year serious. And there's a big headline for Alvarez for this year.
Yeah, so Alvy swore off arepas, guys. I don't know if you know what an arepa is, but it's pretty much like it's a very Latin American dish that is amazing. Every time I come to Florida, there's a farmer's market that happens down the block from where I'm staying, and there's an arepas truck that we go to all the time. Arepas are amazing, and so it's pretty much a pancake that's filled with cheese. It's delicious, and if you eat a ton of those, you're gonna definitely put on some weight. So Alvy has sworn off arepas. He's no longer gonna eat them, and so far he's dropped 10 pounds. And he looks good. He looks in shape. So, maybe it was the arepas that was holding him back.
Dude, how many arepas was this guy eating on a daily basis to lose 10 pounds? That's a significant amount of weight. Like, are you serious? Like, what is this guy, like breakfast, lunch, and dinner? This guy's just pounding like fried cheese? Like,
It's a multi-purpose meal.
Like, you're telling me he lost 10 pounds because he stopped eating this one thing? Like, and it clearly doesn't sound healthy for you. But this guy, like, yo, I feel like you got to go to rehab a little bit if you're losing that much weight based on this one thing that he stopped eating.
And obviously that quote was from Anthony DiComo. He put that out on his X, probably poking a little bit of fun here. Obviously, Alvy works harder than everybody. This dude is out there in the gym constantly. You watch him working his butt off to try to make sure that he's the best player. So definitely making a little poke here, talking a little bit about the arepas. I'm sure that's not all it is. But yeah, let's hope that Alvy is ready for that breakout. We need it. We need it.
Yeah, I'm excited for him. I really am. I think he's going to have a huge year.
All right, let's talk about some of the non-roster invitees. Every spring training, there's always one of these guys that get invited to camp and they just overperform and they outplay. And a few guys this year are Albert Azalea, he used to close for the Cubs, Mike Bowman, Nick Birdie. I think he pitched for the Marlins. Daniel Duarte, Carl Edwards, Kevin Hagret, Joe Jocks, no clue who that guy is. Craig Kimbrell, Ryan Lambert, Nate Lavender, Anderson Servino, Robert Stock, Matt Turner, and Brandon Waddell. Also Jack Wininger, some of the, doubt he's making the roster just because they just want to keep him, stretched out and ready to go. So, some of those guys are prospects, like high-end prospects, where I think that there's honestly less of a chance them making the roster just because they want to get stretched out and want them to get those minor league innings built up. Some of the journeymen, I think they have a better shot, honestly. The Azaleas, the Birdies, those guys kind of show they can perform like how they used to. I think, that's more likely. For catchers, Austin Barnes, he was a tremendous defensive catcher with the Dodgers, and I think they have a good shot, of using him in any issues with, our current backup catcher. Kevin Parada, I still think he needs some more time to kind of go ahead and get seasoned with the bat. Chris Ferrero is like a prospect I personally like a lot. I think he may be Alvarez's replacement. I think there's a lot of promise there. I think the defense is astounding. I think that's a name to kind of just put a pin in and keep tabs on.
Yeah, Sid, I want to talk about a couple of these pitchers. So, like, when you're looking at, like, Alzolay and you're looking at Kimbrel, for example, right? Those are two guys that if they don't make the major league club coming out of spring training, they're gone, right? They're not going to accept a AAA invitation. So, I think for the Mets, they obviously need to perform, number one. And so if Kimbrel and Alzolay are pitching well in spring training, that's going to be a really tough decision to make, because if you don't bring them onto your roster, they're not going to go down to AAA. A guy like Huascan Braziban, which again, he had a great year last year. He's got options still. And so if, let's say, Braziban, Alzolay, Kimbrel all pitching really well and the Mets have to pick 2 out of the 3, it could be a situation where they decide to put down Braziban because he's got the options and keep the other 2 veterans up there, because there's no way that those guys are going to take a AAA assignment. So I think it's going to be, definitely an interesting like spring training battle that's going on in their bullpen. There's a few spots that are going to be available. And again, I keep mentioning this options. I feel like I'm like in the head of David Stearns. I don't even know what's going on here. But, I understand like his perspective of it is that if you don't keep these guys, that's it. Where guys that have those options, whether or not they're happy about it, it just gives them a little bit more breathing room for future injuries or injuries in the future.
I'm absolutely with you guys on the pitchers that are listed out on this list. Alzolay is a guy that I am really intrigued by. Kimbrel, I think you're going to have to give a shot to if he's doing well in spring training. I think he gets a roster spot. So I'm with you completely. None of the other names really stick out to me. Carl Edwards pops out as like a name I recognize, but beyond recognizing the name, I don't know if there's much there. And then obviously you got your Brandon Waddells of the world, right? That might be the left-handed pitcher that we're looking to have. Hopefully a lot of these guys will be on the Syracuse shuttle. Some guys that'll be up on this team helping out at some point. But I think you're right. The veterans that are here are going to go pitch somewhere else. If they're pitching okay in spring training, someone's going to give them a shot. So,
yeah,
let's take a look at the other guys. Sid, I know you mentioned Austin Barnes. I think he's a great guy if you can get him to accept the position, right? Similar philosophy here. Austin Barnes is a major league player. I don't know that he's looking to spend time in the minor leagues for anyone not named the Dodgers, right? Like he's willing to do that for the team that he's been with forever. But there's going to be a major league team that's looking for a backup catcher on opening day. And I can totally see him, if he doesn't get a roster spot, which I don't see him getting. He's not going to get one here with the Mets. I can see him going elsewhere and potentially locking up a major league deal. In terms of the
Yeah.
infielders,
Wait,
there are
say
guys
really,
listed here. Oh, go ahead, Justin.
yeah, really quick with Barnes. Barnes is there for an injury, right, in spring training. So, like, the reason why you signed Barnes to this deal is because if, let's say, Alvarez and or Luis Torrens gets hurt, Austin Barnes would then be at least a capable backup. So if, again, those guys are healthy coming out of spring training, Austin Barnes has no role here. Like you said, maybe another team, there's going to be an injury right somewhere to a catcher position. That might be someone that they would then plug in, right, for their roster. So I think Austin Barnes, his role is specifically for an injury to Alvarez or Luis Torrens. So.
Yeah. Also, not just throwing it out there. Barnes is 36 years old. Maybe he's looking at the next stage of his career as a coach. Him going, if he does decide to take assignment to AAA, he's going to be working with some really good pitchers, and he's excellent at pitch framing. And I think what this is like the new Mets, right? They have the money to kind of throw at these guys to kind of they'll eat it if it doesn't work out. But I think, there be maybe more to Austin Barnes than, just his production on the field. I feel like there's some intangible value that he would bring to, a Jonah Tong or, these Wenningers, these young pitchers that are, have, so much potential. And, to have a guy like Barnes that could kind of put in that, guys that caught for, those excellent pitchers on the Dodgers, would be very helpful in AAA. And I think if he does that and, decides to do that, it's excellent, just management of this roster. And deals like this, didn't happen before with prior ownership. And it looks simple. It looks like whatever. But if you look at it in totality, the Azoles, the Kimbrels, we just didn't do these things before. Now we're just willing, okay, if it works out, great. If it doesn't, that's fine. We'll eat that cost. And, it's awesome to kind of have this ability, now. But that's all I have to say on that. It looks minor and it looks like, hey, but this is just something new, and it feels great, as a Mets fan, to know that you have ownership that's willing to go ahead and sprinkle a ton of money for guys that could provide something that's more than what they can do on the field.
So let's list out the remaining infielders, outfielders that have invites, and then you guys could let me know if there's anyone that really stands out as potentially getting a spot here. I do agree that we mentioned already the pitching, the bullpen has spots. Offensively, there's not a ton of spots left on this roster, but let's take a look at the guys. We got Christian Arroyo, Ryan Clifford, Jackson Cuff, Gray Kessinger, Jacob Reimer, who's gotten a lot of buzz, Jose Rojas, veteran, Ji-Wan Bae, we talked about very, very early in this podcast when he got signed to like maybe one of the first minor league invites to spring training. Carson Benj, obviously, AJ Ewing, Christian Pache, and Jose Ramos are the outfielders. And then Dylan Ross is also listed here. Not really a invite to spring training. Dylan Ross is on the 40-man roster already. So that's a pitcher we didn't mention up above. Of the remaining guys, anyone that you guys think stands out to potentially have a shot of making this team?
Yeah, I mean, obviously Carson Benj, right? Carson Benj is the number one person on this, that the names you just listed out that has a chance of making this roster. We'll see what he does in spring training. We've talked in depth about him already. The other guys that potentially could make this roster because of injury is Christian Arroyo, Clough. I know it sounds ridiculous, Jackson Clough, because of their ability to play shortstop. And so when David Stearns was asked about that injury, he specifically mentioned Christian Arroyo, he specifically mentioned Jackson Clough, and he mentions Brujan. Now, Brujan's already on the 40-man roster, which is why his name is not listed out there. But those guys, in terms of Arroyo and Clough, have a chance of making this roster because of the Lindor injury. Christian Arroyo is someone that has played in the major leagues before. He's played third base, he's played shortstop. So I would think that he's got a leg up in terms of like being a potential fill-in there if it's not Brujan.
Yeah, agreed with all that. But I just want to identify Ryan Clifford. I hope, and I have such faith in Ryan Clifford taking over first base for the Mets long term. And I think this may be the spring where he just jumps out and takes this job and Polanco will be a DH, or, he'll be a super utility. And it's always been Ryan Clifford. And, you could go back and Stearns looks like a genius because he let Pete walk, because he knew he kind of had, this guy just sitting in the minors that was ready. So that's the name that kind of jumps off. And I think, it'll be interesting to see if he just goes ahead and tries to grab the bull by the horns this spring.
I don't know if you saw my eyebrows when they went up. You think that Ryan Clifford could potentially earn the starting first base job out of spring training? Just want to clarify.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
I mean, I do believe that Ryan Clifford has a potential to be a solid major leaguer at some point. You're the prospect guy. I don't know that he's ready. I don't know that especially with the guys that we've added to the roster already, I would be shocked if Ryan Clifford were to get the starting first base job over Polanco and Vientos. But I've been shocked before. Like, this is not like Pete Alonso coming out of his spring training and earning the job. There was always that possibility. In fact, Met fans were saying it's a shame that the Mets are not going to let Pete Alonso be the starting first baseman because he earned it and he was ready. And then the Mets shocked everybody and actually allowed Pete to take the job on opening day. I don't know that Ryan Clifford is viewed in that light yet by at least not by me, not by Met fans. If that ends up being the case, that will be a wild turn of events.
Yeah, David Stern.
Remember where you heard it first.
Yeah, David Stern has talked about Ryan Clifford, and again, maybe we're reading too much into this, but he talked about how offensively he, obviously took a step forward, but he also talked about his defensively taking a step forward. He also when he talked about defensively, he talked about him being an outfielder. And then he talks about him being a first baseman. So, Sid, I don't know if you know much about it, but I guess he's played both outfield and first base in the minor leagues. And I guess this past year, he mostly was a first baseman, but he also, I guess, has had experience in the outfield as well.
I'm going to throw up here, guys, my 26-man roster prediction. So we've talked a lot about these invites to spring training already. These are the guys that I think are going to make the major league roster if I'm predicting today. So I'll take you guys through it. Everyone in black here is listed out as making the team. One of the guys that's listed on here in black that I'll talk about on the offensive side on the bench is MJ Melendez. We didn't give him his own spot here, but for MJ Melendez, pretty much a lock to make this team as a backup outfielder, in my opinion. His catching ability, I think, is huge for this team because it allows for days for Alvy to DH, which is something the Mets were always concerned about doing, and then having to have Terrence be the backup, starting in the game, and now if someone gets injured, it's problematic, right? You don't have a catcher that could step in. MJ Melendez allows that to happen as an outfielder on your team. He's obviously played a lot there. He's got the ability to catch, which I think helps with Alvy potentially stepping in and having those DH days. The one remaining spot on the bench, so we've got Terrence on the bench, obviously. Tyrone Taylor obviously has a spot on the bench. I'm giving one to MJ Melendez. And then Vidal Brujan, I think, is the guy that's going to take the infield job here. He's a guy that's already on the 40-man roster. He's had a ton of potential as a prospect, but really defensively is why he's here. Potentially stepping in for Lindor if he needs to miss some time. This is a guy that I think is gonna get that backup job as an infielder for this team. You guys want to talk offense, and then we'll jump to the bullpen?
Yeah. You obviously have Lindor making the roster, and we just kind of mentioned before, he potentially could be hurt. So if Lindor now is not on the opening day 26-man roster, you have Brujan, and then now you're looking at an empty roster spot. Assuming they're going to fill it with an infielder. It could be that Arroyo, it could be that guy Clough, right? That has potential. But then it also just can be Carson Bench, right? And so you would then have Bench in there. Now, the interesting part would be if Lindor is healthy and Bench is now going to make this team, what the Mets would then do. If it would be Melendez or Brujan, now obviously not making this club. So that would be something interesting I could see happening. If that is the case, right, maybe it is Benj instead of Brujan, or it is Benj instead of Melendez. And that really only happens is if Lindor is starting in the 26-man opening day roster.
And then jumping down to the starting rotation, I do list out a 6-man rotation for the New York Mets. We'll see where that ends up going, but I list Peralta, McClain, Peterson, Holmes, Minaya, and Senga as the 6 starters on this team. I just don't see any of those guys potentially going to the bullpen. So if they're all healthy, I do think it's going to be a 6-man rotation here. Regardless of what I said about Kodai Senga earlier, the rest of the Mets on this team do benefit from the 6-man rotation. We saw the numbers last year with Peterson, Holmes, Minaya. They all benefited when the 6-man rotation was in play. Their numbers were a lot better. So I think if you've got all 6 of these guys healthy going into the start of the season, you're rolling with a 6-man rotation. Tobias Myers gets a spot. Brooks Raley, Luke Weaver, and Devin Williams are bullpen guys. That leaves 3 remaining bullpen spots that could be earned by some of those guys that will be listed below, and I'm giving those spots to Alzolay, Craig Kimbrell, and Oscar Brazier. What would you guys do differently?
That seems good. I feel like that, a lot of these younger guys may have to take the back seat to the veterans, which is fine. Better to kind of have the seasoned vets to kind of take a lot of the early innings and give some of the younger guys some time to work it out or take some breaks so they're not pounding a ton of high stressful innings early in the season. I think that may be something worth consideration. And, hey, 50 pitches from Craig Kimbrell in April doesn't really affect us, unfortunately.
The one guy that I think is going to make this roster is Luis Garcia, who's a reliever. They signed him to a $1.75 million contract with incentive base of another $1.25 million. I know he's 38 years old, but he has been someone that has been a successful bullpen arm. If he is making this opening day roster, then you're looking at either an Alzolay or Kimbrell potentially not making it, or again, as I kind of previously mentioned before, maybe it is a situation where you kind of like hope you can get some innings, right? As Sid was just mentioned before with Kimbrell of like 50 pitches in May. Maybe you can hopefully just try to get a little bit out of those veterans guys and you put Brazier down in the minor leagues and then you have a Luis Garcia, right? Who's going to be in there. But I can't fathom them signing Luis Garcia and not using him in the bullpen unless he's just absolutely horrific in spring training, because he's been someone that has been a pretty good reliever in his career so far.
Not feeling him. I don't think he's going to make it.
Yeah, you don't like this guy. You have actually, every single time we've done this, you've ignored this guy. I don't know. That's just my feeling. I feel as though Luis Garcia, I don't want to say he's a lock, but I think he's got a spot in this bullpen. And so, I want Alzolay to be successful. I want Kimbrell to be successful because that means that they're pitching well in spring training and they have clearly had a successful career prior to this upcoming season. But if that is the case, again, that's another good thing. Another good thing to have is that all of these guys are pitching really well, and it's a tough decision to make. And tough decisions aren't bad decisions; they're just tough, right? And so that would be a good thing if the Mets and Stearns had to make that decision.
Yeah, lots still developing here in Mets spring training. We're going to see how things play themselves out. Lot to figure out for the New York Mets here, and it's going to be an exciting time. Let's all enjoy spring training. Hopefully, I can check some of it out while I'm down here in South Florida. That's going to bring us to the end of this podcast. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Continue to like, follow, subscribe, and drop us a line at any point in time on our social media accounts.
Luis Robert, please tell us, if you're listening to this pod, how to pronounce your name.
Meet the Mets fans, voices rising up from the stands. Hear their cheers, hear their groans, feel their highs, feel their moans. Stories untold now on the mic. Mets fans unite.